few minutes every day in which we make the argument about loving our neighbors and buying local. Near is better than far, small than big, simple than complex. And if you are a provincialist like I am, I'm a recovering cosmopolite trying to become a Chattanoogan, trying to become a loco-centrist, a localist, a Nooga-centrist. And that is what I am, David Tulis, the leading Nooga-centrist in Chattanooga, at your service, at your very service. In the footnotes, they fight against us as well, and I just steamroll right over them. They're in 5-point type. I'm in 5-point type also, but I've got no serifs on my letters, and so I'm much sleeker and sharper than them. And so I cut through all the fog and declare in the footnotes that personal is better than corporate and physical than abstract. Make sure you like us on Facebook. The name is David Tulis. We are Nooga Radio. Glad to have you along here just for the next minute or two. We've got things I want to suggest are stimulative of your appetite for liberty and self-government. We are the liberal station. Now let me give you some explanation there. I am the classical liberal of Chattanooga, and of course there are others. They don't quite self-identify. They don't virtue signal as I'm trying to here. but that is what I am, a classical liberal of the Bastiatian and de Tocquevillian and Von Misesian and Gary Northian sense. That is what I would say would be a quick way of identifying my free market perspective. And making good use, of course, of writers from Chesterton up to today, Charles Hugh Smith, who writes at of2minds.com, who's a very, very fine writer, whose work I read with great attention, whose books I have read very, very carefully. They're dog-eared volumes from him that I tote around, thinking continually that I'm going to need them for something, right? I have these certain books with me, including Garrett's volume about his 3 essays about the declension of the United States into a military empire. But there is these are grand topics, and I guess I evoke them, even though we're loco-centrist and we never really get to talking about President Trump. You know, yesterday when the story broke about Corker's lashing interview in the New York Times, I just couldn't get to it. I couldn't get to it because, well, I figured there were other things that were more important, and that other notable hosts, even here on our wonderful Nooga-centric nationally focused station, would cover them. So I didn't get to that, and I'm just going to let that whole thing pass. But the good people are there. They're very busy, and I want to talk about just a couple of things that will give you confidence. Okay, they're going to give you confidence in the good people, and if you can trust them on their surveillance of you, my listener, you can certainly trust all averments from them. Well, an averment is not a vermin. Okay, it's not headlights. An averment is a promise or statement of truth, right? Like a vow, right? If they vow that you are safe and that they're looking out for you, you can certainly trust them. And I think we just need to consider how far would trust them. And I would say it's quite a distance. It's probably more. You're going to get from me the advice that you should trust them more than you probably actually should. Okay, and I do that because I'm a very gracious man, a man of lenity. That's me. I'm a lenient person. I'm let them have their way. I'll let them have their say. And of course the mainstream media gives them their say every day. So you get kind of both sides. You get my approval of them, and of course the establishment narrative in the Main Street press now, or Main Street media, because they're in a way they're not the press, they're just the media. And we know we can take the word of Andy Burke for it, that whatever he says, wherever he tells you, he is not in the media. Okay, I think you should take that and maybe run with it. Well, BuzzFeed has a story about how parts of the Federal Treasury Department are involved in surveillance. This is from BuzzFeed, a story denied by Mr. Mnuchin and his munchkins under him as not true. The story is flat out wrong, they say. An unsourced suggestion that an office within Treasury is engaged in illegal spying on Americans is unfounded and completely off base. It's a report about two divisions. The FinCENS division. FinCENS is the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, and another one is OIA, Office of Intelligence and Analysis, charged with monitoring suspicious financial transactions. Now, of course, every financial transaction is suspicious, right? If it's being done by people like you, just a common American, a common Chattanoogan, it probably is suspicious because they don't know why. They can't explain why, just that it's happening. And of course, the volume of data that is sucked up by the national government is humongous. There are every day files sent by banks and lenders into the intelligence division of the Treasury Department, which, according to Jessica Garrison, is repeatedly and systematically violating domestic surveillance laws by snooping on private financial records of citizens and companies. Now, at least a dozen people in the past year in another branch in FinCENS have warned Congress. The story says that citizens and residents' banking and financial data is being illegally searched and stored, and the breach, some sources say, extended to other intelligence agencies such as the National Security Agency, whose officers use the Treasury's Intelligence Division as an illegal backdoor to gain access to American citizens' financial records. Of course, the NSA says that it is not operating outside of its authorities or knowingly violating U.S. persons' privacy and civil liberties. That to suggest that is categorically false. But a senior Treasury official says this is domestic spying, again by FinCENS, that began under President Obama and is continuing under President Trump. FinCENS officials have accused their counterparts at OIA, the intelligence unit, of violating this separation by illegally collecting and retaining domestic financial information from the banking database. Now, there's another story that tells you that will further increase your confidence in the good people, right? We want to have confidence in them because we can't trust local people, right? That you have to believe in national figures, you have to believe in stars and people with handsome faces who look good and who are not bald. That is how you know that person's reliable. If he has hair, he's going to be reliable. This is from Mint Press News, and it's about the loss of money at the Pentagram, right? The military department, the War Department, it used to be called. Now it's called the Defense Department. Citing a Reuters report, I think I may have read about this earlier, but the U.S. Army lost $6.5 trillion in 2015 due to wrongful budget adjustments. Nearly half of this massive sum, $2.8 trillion, was lost in just a single quarter. Reuters noted that the Army lacked the receipts and invoices to support those numbers, the adjustments, or simply made them up to create an illusion that the books are balanced. There are a couple of professors, Mark Skidmore of economics at Michigan State, and Catherine Austin Fitts. She's an activist writer, very, very free market oriented, very suspicious of the good people, unlike you. And she and the gentleman have pulled together a report that looks in detail at the DoD budget and found that between HUD and DoD, between 1998 and 2015, they lost over $21 trillion in taxpayer funds as a direct result of unsupported journal voucher adjustments made to department logs. According to the Office of the Comptroller, unsupported journal voucher adjustments are defined as summary level accounting adjustments made when balances between systems cannot be reconciled. Often these journal vouchers are unsupported, meaning they lack supporting documentation to justify the adjustments or are not tied to specific accounting transactions. By comparison, the cost per taxpayer of all the wars waged since 9/11 is $7,500. The comparison to keep in note is that the total loss for every man, woman, and child of these two agencies is $65,000. Again, $21 trillion, 1998 to 2015. So we want to make sure that, we don't, if money is lost, that Americans get it, right? We want to make sure that American businesses and companies and boards of directors get the excess. We want them to get it. And we want to we want to be confident in the good people. And I think if anything I can do to help them raise your esteem of them and lower your esteem of local economy of your markets, that is my job. Now, I wanted to talk about something else. There's been a bill that we're going to find out a little bit what happened to this measure. A bill that was in the Senate this past session by Kyle. It is called the Tennessee Pay Equality Act, and it is something that we want to explore because it has behind it a good idea, right? The good idea is that women are paid less than men, and therefore we need to have a way of adjusting that, because that is a grievance. That is a grievance that we want to prevent, and we want to prevent it not by the sweetness, if you will, the operation of culture, individuals in the marketplace. We want to have these improvements made now, and we want to have them improved by litigation, and that is what is opened up in this measure, which allows for state scrutiny of the master-servant relationship. Now, employment is the master-servant relationship at every turn, and it is regulated. It is federally regulated, and if you're an employer, you're also involved in an activity subject to state regulation. And so, the Tennessee Pay Equality Act gives a new mechanism for probing down into your business and giving a method of accentuating the grievance of not being paid as much as somebody else. A woman not being paid as much as a man for the same work. Now that's the hitch there, is that if it's the same work and the man should not be paid more than the woman. Now what I think is worth noting about this is that here we have one more example of people wanting something. They want a result. They want a fruit of a marketplace that the marketplace is continuing not to give them. Right? Women tend to be paid less than men. If you take statistical data, it will show generally that men are paid more. And if you have an egalitarian framework and you have a desire to boost one part of humanity, the part whose sex is female, you're going to want to have a way of bringing that change about by legislation. And here again, we have, you might say, social engineering. We can't bring things about by changing culture, by having better movies, more newscasts, more magazines, more websites that change people's opinions in this direction. That those things don't work enough. We can't bring about these changes by the operation of the marketplace. So we're going to have to find a way of seeing it in a way that turns the difference into a grievance, which then allows for an attorney to bring a litigation against an employer. And so what we have here is a new system and a new reason for there to be litigation against a business owner. And in the definitions, we're told that no employer shall discriminate among employees on the basis of sex by paying any employee a wage rate less than the wage rates the employer pays to any employee of the opposite sex for comparable work on jobs, the performance of which require comparable skill, effort, and responsibility, and which are performed under similar working conditions. Now, that sounds fine, but think about being an employer and having to face that, or think about being someone who works in a business and you're going to reach up to these words and you're going to have to prove each word in court, right? Where does the grievance hang the most strongly? What support in words like that do you have the best claim? And that's what happens with all efforts to coerce an end, right? To coerce a good result, we would say, we just grant it it's a good result, and we're going to do that by claims in court. We're having a new cause of action if this passes. Now, there are some exceptions in this legislation. That it doesn't seek to overturn seniority systems. It doesn't seek to overturn merit systems. It doesn't seek to overturn systems that measure earnings by quality or quantity of production. A bona fide factor other than sex, which would be education, training, experience. Those are all accepted as reasons why the man in the job doing the same job as a woman is paid more, right? He has more background, maybe more education, and so on. So those are things that the employer suddenly now has to determine that exist for his employees to avoid litigation. He has to make sure, he has to kind of probe down now into his staff to make sure that if there's a differential in payment in wages, that be justified. So we now have to start reviewing if this passes, we have to start reviewing our employees' histories and making sure that there is a reason, because if there's litigation, that will be what your personnel director is going to have to be doing to show that the employer is not an offender. And in the ordinance, in the proposal, you can't cut pay to achieve compliance, right? You can't cut the pay of someone to make that person be paid the same as the member of the opposite sex. But you can raise the pay of the discriminated against employee, but you can't cut the pay of the other party. Now, there are a bunch of shall nots in here, right? Your shouts and shall nots in the bill. An employer shall not prohibit an employee from disclosing or discussing the amount of the employee's wages or the wages of another employee of the employer that has been disclosed voluntarily by the other employee. He shall not prohibit an employee from inquiring about the wages of another. Now, I think I worked at a company that forbade any inquiry among the staff as to what that person is earning. And of course, they're forbidding that question is a way of avoiding the envy problem, right? The sin of envy that is in the parable of in the Lord's parable about those who are employed later and later in the day, and those who are hired at the end of the day are paid the same as those who were hired at the beginning. And those who were hired at the beginning complained at the good master for not being paid more, right? They were the victims of the sin. They were displaying the sin of envy, which the Lord condemned. And because who is to say what the master can do, and who is to forbid the master giving more to the man who worked just an hour, or giving the denarii to the man who worked just an hour, and not a denarii to the man who worked from the morning, right? It's up to him, right? After all, employment is a grace to the person who's hired in that parable. But here, the employer can't make a rule like that you can't inquire. The employer shall not require an employee to sign a waiver or a document that denies the employee of the employee's right to disclose or discuss the amount of the employee's wages. You see, you're getting to a lot of words right here, right? These are words that are, it is in sans serif type in the way I printed it off the internet, but the serifs belong there because each letter with a serif on it has, as it were, a little knife, a little micro knife that the word has, drawing blood wherever it's read. It draws blood against you, the reader, the employer, who's going to have to deal with this legislation if it passes. The employer shall not discharge, discipline, discriminate against, retaliate against, or otherwise penalize an employee who discloses or discusses the amount of the employee's wages or the wages of another employer, and so on. So what happens here is that in this legislation is, again, it's more commercial government, more control of the marketplace, more. Well, Dinesh D'Souza would say, well, this is just another part of fascism where the state looks down into your private business and controls how people think. It controls the words that they have. It controls the rights among them. It brings in a state interest in a private relationship. But of course, that person would say, well, it's not private because it's employment. It's public. It is regulated in federal statute and in Tennessee. The commissioner shall endeavor to eliminate pay practices unlawful under this part by informal methods of conference, conciliation, and persuasion. So it's not just enforcement. He is there to make things right. He's there to be the negotiator, the peacemaker, if you will, between the grieving party, the woman who's suing to have redress, and the employer. He's there not to facilitate. He is there to negotiate, as it says here. But what we have here seems like is a creation of another EEOC, the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission of the national government. We have now, it seems in this provision, a new duty for the commissioner, a new area in which he can expand his services to the free market, the ostensibly free market in Chattanooga and in Hamilton County. Meddling and mediating, right? That's what he is proposing. what's also of interest is that there's a crime committed. The statute creates a new crime, in other words, a paper crime, a crime that is not a malum in se, but a crime that's malum prohibitus. In other words, a crime in which there is no injured party, but it is a crime because it's said to be a crime. And now people can be misdemeanants if they run afoul of this sort of legislation. To find out more about this and the interest of women in the marketplace, David Tulis, we're going to talk with Emily O'Donnell, who is from the Women's Fund of Greater Chattanooga. She is an attorney. She worked for many years at Legal Aid of East Tennessee. And we'll find out more about the interest of women in the marketplace. David Tulis.